everybody, this is going to be a video talking about rib releases, what they are, what type of exercises and routines might give them to you, and my experience of having what can only be described as one of the most intense physical releases of my life. So I'm sort of making this video to help guide you through a rib release, especially if you have one or had one yourself. And yeah, I don't know how long I'm going to speak for, but let's see how we go. So a rib release is when your ribs release apart from one another, or from sticky muscles, or from your spine effectively. So imagine here that this is your rib cage, and you've obviously got your rib cage through all of your thoracic area. Your ribs basically start up here around where the collarbone is, and they go all the way down to where your lower back starts, effectively like a massive, massive rib cage. And there are loads of muscles in that area. You've got your kind of hip flexors, you've got your diaphragm, you've got your obliques, you've got your rotator cuff muscles, you've got your serratus anterior, your traps, your lats, so many muscles. QL muscle, I'm just saying muscles now, but there are lots in the area. The muscles that are basically in between your ribs are called your intercostal muscles. And what happens if we have a life where we are more sedentary than we should be, so we're not like mobilizing our rib cage enough in all the ways that we can, if we're not walking enough, if we're not just moving enough in general. But on top of that, if we're really stressed and we're not breathing very well, so we're not utilizing our diaphragm and moving our rib cage from the inside out using our breath. If you think about it, it's not just you kind of choosing to move your rib cage like this that moves the rib cage, but we should be moving our rib cage outwards using our breath. But for many people, for different reasons, they're stuck in mouth breathing, where effectively we're using the accessory muscles of respiration, so around the neck and around the shoulders, and we're like this. And the shoulders are going up around the ears, but we're not going into the belly and the lower rib cage and the diaphragm like we're supposed to, and probably like we did as babies. So I see it as twofold. People get sticky rib cage muscles because they're not moving enough in general, but also they're not breathing well enough, and then they're kind of stuck in this like stress state. And what happens is if we're not moving our rib cage, just like any other part of our body, if we're not moving our feet get stiff. If we're not moving our hips get stiff. If we're not moving our shoulders get stiff. I won't go through every part of the body, but that principle of use it or lose it is so important. If you are in our modern world not actively deciding to take your body through its full range of movement, doing things like posture, then your body's going to get stiff, because our lifestyles no longer call for the level of demand that our bodies need to keep them supple and pain-free. So just like any other part of your body, your rib cages can get stiff and the ribs can effectively get stuck together. It might not be quite like that, but say the ribs are supposed to be like that, you might have one side where you don't breathe quite so well, and the ribs are a bit closer together, and the muscles just get tangled, the fascia gets tangled, it gets stiff, it gets sticky, it gets tar-like, and you can live with that stiffness for a really long time. Like, it could start when you are a baby. If you're not given, for example, enough of an opportunity to learn to crawl when you're a baby, which is a really important part of development for your kind of spine and your hips and your pelvis. If you never got given enough chance to crawl, then that might be a reason why you have a sticky rib cage from like a really young age. And then you kind of just learn to live with it, and you perhaps think that everybody feels the same as you, but actually they don't. That's your lived and valid experience of normal, but that's not everybody else's experience of normal, if that makes sense. So you can have a sticky rib cage for a really long time. And if you imagine the layers and layers and layers and layers of tension and how long something can be stuck for, when we do certain posture exercises, certain posture routines, and the rib cage unpops, so the ribs start to unpick apart from one another, that level of muscular release can be a real shock to the system. So it's absolutely a good thing. If your ribs are going from being stuck together to moving further apart, so they're in that sort of more natural aligned position that we want them to be in, that is a good thing. But that process of release, that process of change is next level. So I said at the beginning of this video that I had one a few months ago, and I'll explain my experiences and kind of how I got myself out of it. But I just wanted to explain like why your ribs might get sticky and what a rib release is. It literally is exactly what it says on the tin. It's not, you're not dislocating the rib, you're not breaking the rib. It's not a bad thing. It's literally the muscles being that tense. When they unstick from each other, it can kind of send shockwaves through your system. So the type of exercises that these rib releases are going to happen in are, generally speaking, going to be the exercises where we use our cork posture rolls or our cork posture blocks against our rib cage. So for those of you watching this, you may be familiar with the kind of block therapy exercises, some of which I've been incorporating into the routines and the classes that I teach within the Posture Squad. And we basically just get a cork posture roll, one of my cork posture rolls, or a normal yoga block, and we lay in these, sort of onto these things, just breathing deeply. So it can just be that we're laying prone on our bellies, we've got a roll underneath our rib cage, kind of wedged into that tense area. We're breathing calmly in and out of our nose, trying to get our diaphragm expanding out against the block to release this tension. And the funny thing is that when you're doing these types of exercises, and certainly from what happened to me, but what I've heard from other people, you don't really have any awareness in that moment that what you're doing is crazy intense. So, you know, I was actually teaching a 2-hour workshop, and mine happened the day afterwards. And I was so confused because I didn't even feel that much stretching or pressure or anything like that going on. But the next day I literally woke up and I felt like I'd been hit by a ton of bricks. It really was quite mad. So it's the block therapy exercises that are, generally speaking, going to give you a rib release, just because of the nature of what we're doing with them. We are using gravitational force, which is a fancy word for saying our body weight against a hard surface, to then coax the diaphragm and the rib cage to breathe into that hard surface. And that action makes the muscles release, the fascia release, which is a good thing, but an intense thing. So hopefully you're going to understand what I'm talking about. If you're in the Posture Squad, you will know the routines and the classes that I'm referring to. You can also find them within the class library as well, because some of you are probably going to watch this video and be intrigued by this concept and actually maybe even want to give yourself one, which I can understand, and there is absolute merit to it, but the concept of a rib release does require maybe some warning, I guess, just before people do them, so that you are aware that it may happen. Not that the thing itself is to be worried about, but if you're not prepared for it, you may be worried when it happens, sort of thing. So I'll talk you through my experience, and I'll talk you through the things that I did whilst my rib release was happening. So I know exactly when it happened. It was the 2nd of January, 2025, a couple of months ago. I had taught my 2-hour great big whole body reset, which you can find in the Posture Squad software, which may be one of the routines that gives you a rib release as well. Like I said, didn't feel anything when I was teaching the class whatsoever. A minor amount of stretching, nothing intense, nothing different than what I had been doing. I was practicing block therapy exercises for probably about 6 weeks before I started teaching them in the new year. And I hadn't had anything like this happen to me before. I woke up the next day after teaching this workshop and I was like, oh my God, what's happened? So my Posture Squad members will know, or maybe if you're watching this on YouTube and you've seen some of my classes, I talk a lot about the restriction that I have, or had, to be fair, because it's a lot better now, but I had a lot of restriction around the right-hand side of my rib cage. It started in lockdown. So during lockdown, my hips eased up, I developed scoliosis in my spine, and I became much more stiff in this like rib cage area here on that right hand side. I've spoken about it a lot, so I won't talk about it anymore. But that was what had happened. And the day after this workshop, it was like somebody had kicked me in my ribs, like hard boot to my ribs. So the next day I felt quite sensitive. I was like, oh gosh, what's happened? This is a bit weird. And kind of carried on as normal. Like it wasn't as extreme as it then got actually the day after that. So I taught the workshop on the Thursday, woke up on the Friday, was aware that it felt like I'd been kicked in the ribs. Because of the job that I do and because I'm not scared of my body, I'm just not. I see things as like a message. I was thinking I've probably had some form of rib release. I've been telling myself for years, I really want this scoliosis to go. I really want this restriction to go. I've been putting all of these things in place to kind of make that happen. And I always had this like intuitive awareness that the day that my kind of scoliosis let go and the ribs freed themselves, that it wasn't going to be pleasant, that it had to be intense because I could feel how tense it was. So that tension had to go somewhere, like it had to be purged out of my body. So that I just knew immediately that that was what had happened. So Friday was kind of okay, took things a bit gingerly, but really wasn't too worried about it. I ended up doing like an hour Pilates class in the afternoon, and didn't think much of it. And then the Saturday morning when I woke up, it was just next level. I couldn't believe it. So I remember I woke up in the morning to go downstairs to feed the animals, and I kind of took my first step out of bed, and that first step on the floor sent like shockwaves of cramps through my body. It's the only way I can like try and put this into words. It was like with every minor bit of vibration, so be it coughing, talking, laughing, sneezing, walking, moving, anything, it was like, I guess probably an earthquake is probably a kind of a good way of describing it. But if you imagine your kind of foot hitting the floor and then the shock waves from your foot moving up your body, it was like my rib cage was rattling itself into position almost like this. And with every little wobble that my rib cage did, it sent this paralyzing feeling, cramp through my body. It took my breath away. And I managed to get myself downstairs to the kitchen, and I sort of was like holding onto the surface like, oh my God, what is happening? This is insane. Trying to bend down to feed the dog, trying to do this and that. And just honestly, every single movement that I made was like someone was just kicking me again in the ribs. It was so intense. So I got myself back up to bed, and like getting myself into bed was really, really hard as well. I had to kind of slide into it, and Ben had to like help because I don't normally sleep with pillows, but I needed to be like propped up a little bit because laying fully flat was too much. And I'll come to that when I give some tips afterwards. But he put some pillows under my head, and I just had to lay there for a few hours. And then again, because I'm very much somebody who believes that the more that you stay still, the more that you stagnate. And I'm not somebody who believes in like taking painkillers or masking symptoms of pain. I don't like take medication for stuff like this. I just wouldn't do it. I'm like, let's feel this out. Let's sense what my body wants. I'm not giving advice on that, by the way. If you want to take painkillers, that's your prerogative. I personally do not take anything ever, but not in this kind of situation. So I was just allowing myself to feel it. The reason being is because if you allow yourself to feel it, you know what your body wants more of, and you know what your body wants less of. So it allows you to use intuition rather than kind of hide intuition. That's my feelings on it anyway. So I didn't take anything, and I lay still for a few hours and was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I thought, I've got to get myself up, because the longer that you stay still, the more your body kind of seizes up. So gingerly got myself downstairs, and I got myself into static back, which is a video you can watch on my YouTube. And I just lay in static back for a while, and I was just breathing, aware of the fact that what was happening to my ribs was a release, a very intense release, but I had to make that release almost continue to happen so that it would be over and done with, if you know what I mean. So I just had this like sense that I had to keep encouraging these really intense sensations to happen, because if I didn't, things would be going on for longer. So I lay in static back, and I was just breathing into my nose, diaphragmatically into my ribs. And it felt fine in that moment when I was in it. It was definitely helping like soothe me and make me feel better. But then when I got back up again and started walking, because my rib cage had shifted again, it had ramped everything back up again. So it was kind of exactly what I thought was going to happen, of this is a release, this is freedom, but my body just doesn't understand this like new position that the rib cage is in. So the cramping is having to happen to like concrete everything back in place. And I went to bed early that night, and I'll give you some more tips very shortly. I'm going to try and keep this under 20 minutes. But just to give you kind of heads up that I had probably in total 2 weeks of feeling my ribcage release. I had 5 days-ish where it was like practically debilitating. So like what I've just described, where I was like kind of housebound. I did go and get myself out on a few really like tentative walks. I was trying to do a little bit of posture, like literally just static back stuff and breathing. So I was trying to keep myself moving, but it was really debilitating for like a 5-day period. I felt bruised, which I'll speak about in a second as well. I felt bruised for about 2 weeks in total. And then once it had gone, I missed it. It's so strange to describe, but it was like Stockholm syndrome. So there's like a kind of theory from people that when you have a rib release, it's like you're having a trauma release, that all of that stickiness, all of that tension that you had in your body was like your body storing emotions there in the first place. So it's not only that you're releasing this like physical stuff, but you might be releasing old memories, things maybe you don't want to think about, but ultimately it's helpful that they've come out of your body. And so I definitely think that was happening to me. It was really just weird physically, confronting mentally. I kept having all these like flashbacks of things. Like I'd have a big cramp and then I'd have an old memory flash up that I hadn't thought about for 20 years or so, which was very strange. So there's this idea that when you have the rib release, not only are you going to be in I don't want to call it pain, because I label pain as negative. You know, pain is your body saying no. This is at a really intense release, which if you didn't know what it was, I will give you permission to call it pain. But it's not pain, it's like intense, which is different, but it is painful. So it's not just about this like release of pain or a painful experience. It is also that you're having like a trauma release, emotional release. Some people report feeling really exhausted and wiped afterwards. Some people report feeling sick afterwards. It's like your body is literally purging old shit, but at the same time, it's finding a new postural position for itself. So yeah, 5 days where it was super intense, 2 weeks where I could still feel it. On the third day, I just kept saying to my husband, Ben, I was like, God, I feel so bruised. I feel so bruised, like touching my ribs. And he looked, and I actually did have a bruise that was about this big on that area. I promise you, I wasn't doing anything too dramatic. I wasn't like, you know, punching myself or doing something that you would think that would cause yourself a bruise. It was literally the intensity of this release must have caused some form of like internal bleeding. And I don't mean that in a you know, again, in a scary way, but that's, you know, that's what a bruise is. It's like just a bit of bleeding under your skin. But all of that tension had like loosened up. So I had a bruise there for a while. But yeah, when it passed, it was like I just missed the sensation. I don't know. I would love to hear in the comments if anybody else has had a rib release. I would love to hear from you as to whether or not you think I'm mental or if you feel the same way. But when it all passed, I'm now like, I want another one. And I've been a bit too like busy almost, because if I'm a bit nervous because I know how long it kind of took me out for physically, and I've had so much going on recently that I've almost not wanted to do the things that will give me another rib release, although I highly doubt that once you've had your first one, the second one's not going to be the same, because most of the tension will have come out, I'm sure, the first time. And then after that, it's going to be like, you know, just like less intense because there'll be less stuff to get out. So I'm less nervous of doing it, but I am conscious of the fact that I have got stuff on, and I'm just, if I have like 4 or 5 days kind of taken out physically, I'll need to really allow time for my body to rest, and I just don't feel quite able to at the moment. But I miss it, and I want to get that feeling again, which is just so messed up, and I do not understand it. But there must be, in my opinion, something to that like emotional release. I felt so much lighter, so much calmer. I just felt free in mind and body. It's the only way yeah, it's just hard to describe, but that's the only way I can describe it. And then ever since then, since the rib release happened, my scoliosis is so much more improved. Like I just said, I still know that there is more that needs to unstick. It's not completely free, but it's probably about 85% more free. My breathing is easier. I have less jaw tension. My face feels like kind of more lifted, a little bit less droopy. I feel like I've got less like veins, because I was getting quite veiny around here, which is like the restriction further down, pulling all that forwards. My movement is better, my posture feels better, everything just feels so much better for it. But I had to go through that stage in order to get that outcome that I had, and I will be chasing another rib release soon. So just to wrap the video up, I want to give you some of the tips. I mentioned a few of them already, but I'm just going to say a few of the things that really, really helped me. So number one, again, this is a personal decision. I'm not telling you what to do. But if it was me, I wouldn't take painkillers, because if you're taking painkillers, you will not be able to sense how much or how little your body wants you to move. You take away that intuition. So I didn't take painkillers so I could fully ride out this experience that my body wanted me to have. And I believe that it enabled me to respond appropriately to my body in that time. I tried to go for as many walks as I could. And when I say walks, it was not my normal 10,000 steps stomping over the hills every day like I do where I live. But I did try and get out for like 2 half-an-hour walks every day, because the more that you can keep things really gently moving, the less you are going to like stagnate and stiffen up. So I kept moving as much as I could, but then I almost on the flip side, I kept as still as I could as well. So I spent a lot of time in bed. Like I said, I don't normally sleep with pillows, but I put pillows underneath my like shoulders and rib cage to really help prop me up. And I really use that position to help me breathe into the back of my ribs to help release them even more. So I was doing a lot of things like the walking, like the breathing, that was creating more and more kind of cramping and release sensations, but I was wanting that to happen. The more that you hold your ribs and grip and try not to let the cramps happen, you're actually going to have the problems for longer. So you need to like ride that wave to let it kind of ease out of your body, in my opinion. I'm only saying this from what happened to me personally and within the context of the work that I do, but this isn't like, I'm not saying I'm an expert on this at all. I slept with a bolster underneath my knees. So sleeping with the bolster underneath my knees helped to take a little bit of pulling out of my mid-back, which then also helps the rib cage and the upper fibers of the hip flexors release off a bit better. I kept the area warm. So you may have heard of the concept of like icing inflammation. the man, I can't remember his name now, but the man that invented that concept of icing has since come out and said it's outdated, it doesn't make sense, please don't do it. So please Google this if you don't believe me. But icing an injury takes away the healing. So heat and inflammation are healing. It's your body trying to give itself what it needs. It's sending energy there, and the more like warmth and the swelling that you get, it's the body trying to sort itself out and heal. If you ice, you take away that healing mechanism, so you make yourself suffer for longer effectively. So keep away from coldness. I went hot. I don't have a bath at home, but if you had a bath and you were able to kind of get yourself in and out, having a bath probably would have felt really, really nice. I had a hot water bottle like sandwiched to my rib cage basically all of that time when I was doing static back, when I was sleeping at nighttime, just all the time I had a hot water bottle on the go. That really, really helped. I also got Ben, my husband, just to like rest his hand really gently because he couldn't touch it much more, he couldn't touch it much more like than this because it was so sensitive when it was in that really like bruised phase. But having the warmth of his hand, I don't know if it was like an emotional soothing or a physical soothing, but it felt like both. But every time he did it, I was like, oh, that just feels so healing. That feels so healing. And it was the warmth of it, but I think it probably was just having like the touch of somebody else felt really nice. So keep it super, super warm. Keep yourself super, super warm as best you can. Keep walking as much as you can, but also keep still as much as you can. In the times when you are still, really focus on your breathing. So we're looking to get that nose, lower ribs, diaphragm being recruited. And the last thing, like I said earlier, was I just did static back loads. My body was not in a position to do much else other than static back and supine groin stretch, if I remember correctly. I just stuck to those two exercises for a few days and just spent a decent amount of time with them. And then the only other thing that I was doing, like I said, was trying to get myself out for these walks as well. I think that's what I wanted to say. So this, as ever, has gone on for longer than I intended it to, but hopefully this is helpful because, like I said, I wasn't scared of this experience because I knew what it was and I knew that it was the thing that I had wanted for so long, which was my scoliosis releasing itself off. But the experience is scary if you're not expecting it, and it kind of takes you by surprise. So I know how you feel. Many of you guys, perhaps your rib releases won't be as bad as mine even was, because I had that much tension in the right side of my rib cage, and because in my opinion my scoliosis was pretty strong, not as severe as how other people have scoliosis, but it was noticeable. It was noticeable. I had a lot of releasing to do, so mine may be a lot more intense than what other people have, but I've had a couple of other Posture Squad members say that they've had them as well, and by the sounds of it they weren't out for as long as I was. They've had a few days of discomfort and sort of a bruising sensation, but that's about it. So hopefully this isn't scaring anybody, but this is almost just like a little bit of a guide. You're going through something, it's a good thing. If it can feel a bit scary, but hopefully, well, I trust that you will feel a lot better afterwards, but you've just got to kind of keep telling yourself that. Keep breathing, keep warm, move gently, but also take it really easy for a few days. Try not to overdo things, and definitely, keep away from anything too vigorous. Just keep things nice and gentle. Let your body get over this and see it as like a healing opportunity. It's like a healing journey. You're going through both a physical release and an emotional release. So it will feel really intense, but you might end up missing it in the way that I did. I hope this is helpful. Let me know in the comments if you've had one, and if you've got anything to add. I would love to hear more about other people's experiences.